Sometimes there's a man, he's the man for his time and place. He fits right in there. Sometimes there's a man, I won't say a hero, because what's a hero? But sometimes there's a man, and that's the dude.
This aggression will not stand. This will not stand, this aggression.
But sometimes there's a man. Sometimes there's a man. Wow. Lost my train of thought here.
I don't know about you, but I take comfort in that. It's good knowing he's out there, the dude, taking her easy for all us sinners. Shush. Get you later on down the track.
Tonight, with Independence Day upon us, we're gathered here for what I think might be one of our most important broadcasts all year. Not because we've got a new headline for you about the left's latest corruption, though we do, but because tonight we look at the deeper crisis inside the conservative movement, if there is one, the GOP. It's not really the GOP, is it? The American right. We'll take a look in there. And we'll measure that crisis against the reason this nation was formed in the first place. And that reason was this: to restrain the ambitions of men so that liberty might endure. So as we celebrate the 248th year since our forefathers pledged their lives and their fortunes and sacred honor, we find ourselves in a situation here. A political moment where the words liberty and accountability are often thrown around like meaningless slogans, waved like flags, but rarely defended with any real sacrifice. Few people in Washington today stand as living evidence that those words can still mean something real. Fewer still are willing to risk anything at great cost to themselves. And perhaps no one better embodies the quiet fidelity of someone who is willing to stand for the Constitution than Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie. He's not the loudest man in Congress. He's not the most famous. He doesn't command the massive crowds of a Trump rally. He doesn't dominate cable news. You don't get a lot of sound bites from him. But what he does have, what he does deliver on, is that he has never surrendered. He has a spine of steel when it comes to the Constitution of the United States. And so when President Trump demanded Republican loyalty across the board for the big, beautiful bill, a $2.6 trillion spending package, you know how long it takes to pay that off? Generations. And it's stuffed with pet projects, debt expansion, hidden favors, lots of pork. And Massie, Thomas Massie, the guy from the backwater in Kentucky, was the only Republican in the House to say no. He said no to the popular thing, no to the easy thing, no to the pressure of a party machine ready to crush dissent, ready to crush him. Back in 2020, when COVID panic swept through the nation and swept through the Congress, every career politician scrambled to sign their name to that $2 trillion bill, which would create $2 trillion in new debt. Massie was the only one who forced Congress to come back into session for a recorded vote. They wanted to pass a $2 trillion bill without a vote because it was an emergency. Massie was there, sleeping in the back of his truck to go into the chambers to make sure that they didn't do it because it wouldn't be it's not legal. It's not proper. It's not allowed. You have to have a quorum. You have to have so many members of that body together before you can have an official vote. But they wanted to go ahead and slip it on through while nobody was looking because it was an emergency. Massie believed, rightly, that spending trillions without accountability which is exactly what it had been without a vote, well, that's theft. It's theft from Americans who haven't even been born yet. So when warmongers on the left, neoliberals, and warmongers on the right, neoconservatives, demanded endless blank checks for Ukraine or rushed sanctions without debate, Massie is the one, nearly the only one, who stood alone saying that only Congress, and never a president alone, must have the solemn authority to declare war. So while other so-called constitutional conservatives talk about liberty on social media and then vote for massive omnibus bills or sweeping surveillance powers, Thomas Massie is the one who stands guard over the Fourth Amendment like a lone sentry in a crumbling forest. But let's be fair about it. Let's be honest. Washington is a very complex machine. It is necessary to compromise, to govern at all. Sometimes you have to vote for what is possible to stop something that is worse. But what makes Massie so peculiar in the modern political paradigm in America, what makes him so threatening to the swamp, which is still there apparently, what makes him so dangerous to the entrenched elites, yes, even the populist wave of MAGA, he's dangerous to them too, as you'll see, is that he refuses to bend the first principles that guard the people from the ambitions of both the left and the right. So tonight we're watching the so-called America First movement, the Make America Great Again movement, flirting with proving its critics on the left right that it's not rooted in principle but personality, that it's not conservatism but a cult. And so if the MAGA machine is willing to destroy a man like Thomas Massie for refusing to endorse reckless spending and unchecked executive power, then the movement reveals itself not as a movement of free men defending constitutional order, but as a cult demanding obedience. And what's even worse, while this fight unfolds, what do you see happening in New York City this week? They put forward an open communist, Zoran Mamdani, as the Democratic mayoral nominee. He won the primary, the Democratic primary, and he will be on the ballot for the Democrats in the next mayoral election in New York. He is an unapologetic Marxist, and he's now been mainstreamed. He doesn't hide his ambition to reshape America's largest city around the ruinous utopias that turn nations like Cuba and Venezuela into open-air prisons. He's very happy to fire all the policemen. They might quit anyway, but he has an idea for that. He'll bring in his own brown shirts, his own Red Guard. So this is where we are, a constitutional republic that's been so hollowed out by political vanity that open, proud Marxists can run in the largest city in America. Not only run, but have many people happy that he's there running because he's young and dynamic and fresh and new. All this while one of the few men who still stands for limited and accountable government is cast out by his own side for refusing to trade principle for popularity. So tonight, we ask, and we challenge you to consider this with us. Is Thomas Massie a man out of time, or is he a man made for this time? Time alone will tell. But I will tell you this, the rift between a constitutional conservatism that restrains power and populism that idolizes it is a test of whether America still remembers what Independence Day really means. So stay with us. This story's not about one man. It's about whether people still deserve the liberty their fathers bled to secure. We'll be right back.
Seek ye the truth, and the truth will make you free, and nothing else will do it. Jesus Christ has never lied to anybody. Why won't you listen to him?
And man will either worship the one true God, or man will worship a lie.
You must stay away from people who will not document as fact what they put in their articles. That's why my broadcast scares the hell out of socialists. That's why I was named as the most dangerous radio host in America, because I shoot documented facts which cannot be refuted. That's what's dangerous. Don't spread a rumor. Spread the truth. Document it. Prove it. Make it irrefutable, and you too will become dangerous.
It's time to speak out. Speak out. Speak out.
Tweet it, blog it, Facebook it.
Shout it out to your neighbors and tell everyone you know.
You see, what happens when you broadcast the truth is you piss everybody off.
Faith is resistance.
Armor of Truth Live number 396. Let's welcome to the show the lovely Summer.
Greetings and salutations.
All right. Let's take a look. Now, as we just mentioned, of course, there is, while Trump is busy fighting with who could be a person who could be one of his strongest allies, except for the fact that I don't think Trump is really interested in, he's not a constitutionalist now, is he?
Mm-mm.
I don't think that's really what he is.
Trump has revealed his colors lately, especially blatantly.
Well, I think, yeah, and you know what? People are not going to be willing to criticize him because of what we just went through for 4 years. It was a very scary regime, the Biden regime.
But this one is more scary because it tries to act like it's doing things for our best interest, and it couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, the wrapping of all of the technocracy stuff in patriotic language is consistent. So,
before we get into the Massie movement here and the Massie story, here's what's happening in New York City right now. Londonistan, from Londonistan to
like that, yeah.
New Yorkistan. Surf class for all. Yeah, Zoran Mamdani. Islamo-communism in effect. There he is. You can't stop the Zoran. Or the Zoran.
Orwell is like,
yeah, he's like, wow, man.
We like to bring him out sometimes.
Didn't even expect
Trot
this.
him out as he's, freaking out.
New York's radical threat is on full display. While the so-called conservative movement is fracturing, Zoran Mamdani, the communist candidate, is now poised to challenge Eric Adams, who was the Democrat, will now run as an independent. Mamdani was filmed at the Jamaica Muslim Center's Eid al-Fitr. Is that right? Eid al-Fitr?
Eid al-Fitr.
Eid al-Fitr. Eid al-Fitr event leading a loud chant of free Palestine. Here you have in this article a nice definition of what Marxists historically do. Plug into the pre-existing fault lines, take advantage of the existing grievances to build support for your movement. Mamdani says, here, let's play this for you. Listen, this is why, but let me just pop in here for a second.
It's Eid al-Fitr.
Eid al-Fitr. It's a Muslim holiday.
Yes.
So while the right is attacking Thomas Massie, who is as staunch a constitutionalist, conservative constitutionalist that you will find, and I thought that's what we wanted. Meanwhile, this is what's happening, in New York.
Acknowledge this genocide. When I get to 3, I want you to say ceasefire now. 1, 2, 3. Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! I want to ask you one final thing, to join me in a chant. Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free, free Palestine! Free, free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
Yeah.
This genocide.
So there you go. This is this is better.
So we've got Newscomb on the West Coast, and now we've got this guy, because he basically won. I mean, if I was looking at all the research and stuff, doing a deep dive, and like, I mean, it would be like a miracle if he doesn't, get officially put in November.
I've seen those.
Yeah.
The polls are showing that he would win if they voted today.
Yep.
He's also pushing a racially charged property tax scheme to squeeze wealthier, wider neighborhoods because they're the ones who have succeeded. They're the ones who must be brought down. And it's an unconstitutional wealth grab.
Well, that's also the assumption, because not all whites have succeeded, and not all, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but the ones he wants to take the ones who have. Yeah, and it's not just the white people.
Well, it's the oppressor-oppressed, matrix that they have us all in.
Yeah, so in New York, while we see this obviously unconstitutional wealth grab taking shape, over on the right also another attack on the Constitution from those people who ostensibly are there to defend it. It's all dressed up as equity in New York, though. New York City police officers are warning that they're going to walk off the job en masse if Mamdani wins the election. They don't like his extremist record. They don't like his threats to public safety. They don't like the fact that he said he might fire them all anyway.
What the purpose is about this entire project, it's not simply to raise class consciousness, but to win socialism. And
wow, right there, just off the top. Raise class consciousness.
Right.
Because he believes, as every Marxist, every communist does, is that automatic. If you live in a society like the United States of America, your consciousness is false. You don't even realize it, but you've acquired a false consciousness. You are oppressed necessarily.
You need critical consciousness, and you need to come outside the one-dimensional man.
Right. You need to.
Herbert Marcuse.
Critical consciousness meaning that you need to become aware of all the ways that you are part of the problem, that you are an oppressor, and flip it.
Raising class consciousness is a critical part of that. But making sure that we have candidates that both understand that and are willing to put that forward at every which moment that they have, at every which opportunity that they're given. We have to continue to elect more socialists, and we have to ensure that we are unapologetic about our socialism. There are also other issues that we firmly believe in, whether it's BDS, right, or whether it's the end goal of ceasing the means of production, where we do not have the same level of support at this very moment. And what I want to say is that it is critical that in the way that we organize, in the way that we set up our work and our priorities, that we do not leave any one issue for the other, that we do not meet a moment and only look at what people are ready for.
No, push them beyond what they're ready for. It's bigger than one radical. It's a case study in Islamo-communism, right? This isn't an organic alliance. It's a dialectical tool, manufactured convergence designed to break the old order so that a new one managed by the same elite technocrats can rise in its place. The hate stays real. The revolution stays useful. Once the system is broken, those same revolutionaries get swept aside for the final managerial class and its compliant serf caste. The Bible says, "And now, Lord, look upon their threats and grant your servants to continue to speak your word with all boldness." Yeah, preserve us. Preserve the gospel here in our nation. So what's the goal here? Crush another Christian nation. National identity. Shred constitutional protections and corral us all into this compliant, rootless serf class under technocratic rule. Same pattern is clear across the West. In Europe, elites have unleashed Islamist movements under what French commentators call Islamo-leftism.
A little bit softer.
Yeah, Islamo-leftism. A fusion of communism with political Islam designed to dismantle core Western foundations like free speech, Christianity, and national sovereignty.
Free society.
We will have for you, we'll come back to this story, we will have for you more on Islamo-communism coming up, because we've been doing some research on that this week, and we've got some
refreshing our chops on that. We've talked about it before.
Yeah,
definitely we've spoken about it, but now it's come about and it's relevant again.
Basically this.
Talk about it, yeah.
We'll go into detail about it later, but over the centuries, Islam was a prime target for the socialists, the revolutionary socialists that came up out of the Enlightenment. Islam became a prime target for that movement and has been co-opted and used in what we're calling here Islamo-communism, as what they call it there in Europe, Islamo-leftism, but you have to call it what it is. And basically it can be an even scarier version, but ultimately the way it works out, usually there are plenty of Islamist states in the Middle East today that are functionally communist states already. And that's what we see happening in New York, or that's what that's what Mamdani would love to establish there. Would be. It's just interesting because is he a practicing Muslim? I mean, he comes from a home that's Islamic.
I would assume that he is, but yeah. I don't actually.
And he shows up. He shows up at the Muslim festivals for the holiday.
He definitely does. Mm-hmm.
And his parents are from that tradition, so it's just a scary thing. In London, you've got Muslim Mayor Sadiq Khan, where you've seen crime surge, Sharia norms becoming normalized in public life, and the British identity steadily eroded. I heard one retired British military official speaking this week saying that the UK is basically, you can't defend it. It's so broken and so full of, Muslims that it couldn't be defended. If someone tried to take it over right now, they couldn't. They would win. So that brings us around to Massie, Sassy Massie. So we want to talk to you about this. We want you to come away from this show understanding who should you trust. You might be one of those who says, I'm not going to trust either one of them. Well, wouldn't it be nice if we had the luxury of sitting this one out? Unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of sitting it out. This is a riff that could expose MAGA as a populist cult. Many people already think that it is. I'm holding out hope that they'll pull it together here, but there are all kinds of problems with the big beautiful bill. Particularly, Summer, there's the carbon capture pipelines, for one thing, that this bill doesn't speak directly about carbon capture pipelines, but it does talk about fuel pipelines, and they would be the same thing. Not regulations, but lifting regulations on where pipelines can be laid. We showed you this. What was the name of that documentary?
Pipeline CO2, I believe it was, or I can look it up.
Yeah. So the documentary from about the carbon capture pipelines that were being run all over the United States under high pressure. Of course, it has to do with
unearthing the CO2 pipeline. Yeah.
That's part of what's happening in the bill. The optics and rhetoric of this administration may seem more appealing than the last, and certainly, but that's precisely what makes it more dangerous. As Summer has written here, as we've been saying, this time the deception is wrapped in patriotism, prayer, and populism. There's a clever, fine-tuned seduction at play to redefine truth, to steal land, gain control, and spiritualize control. American people aren't resisting, they're applauding it. So let's cut through the patriotic branding and do a quick reality check. This article is on Substack right now. This is the one titled Trump's Push for the Big Beautiful Bill and Abraham Accords is not good for America. And I'll run this down for you right quick before we get it, because this is the bill that Massie is fighting. And by the way, Trump has started a political action committee called MAGA Kentucky, and they've made an ad against Thomas Massie. It's one of the first times you've ever seen a sitting president do a hit piece on his own party.
Yeah, and I have a theory about that of course I can't prove, but we do know that they'll do stuff like they'll put out a story or a conflict, you know what I mean? And then they literally like want to track like who is sympathetic to that, and they can sort of like a way that they do data collection to get a pulse on who would even, understand correctly that Thomas Massie is standing up for the Constitution. And then you've got this data set where everybody is sympathetic to Massie. And so it's a way that they can aggregate personality traits and then try to nudge people with their compliance system that they use with AI. So that's my thought.
Well, that's what Palantir does. They gather data. They gather information. And
pre-crime. Yeah, pre-crime.
Who is saying what about Massie, and you get put into a little bucket. But what's wrong with the big beautiful bill? First of all, Section 41006 gives the federal government total control over CO2, hydrogen, and petroleum pipelines. Now, capture isn't mentioned here, but that's what it means when it says CO2 pipelines. That's all it can be. FERC, which is the regulating agency, gets exclusive authority, bypassing states and local governments. Same thing with the artificial intelligence portion of the bill too, right? It would be
for 10 years they get to do whatever they want, and the local
deregulated for 10 years.
Local areas can't say anything. You know.
So they're going to be able to build their power plants and their data centers. And of course, eminent domain will play a major role in both of those, the pipelines and the building of these AI data centers. $10 million is what it'll cost you to bypass property rights. $10 million will get you, will allow corporations to override property rights, private property rights of citizens, especially in rural red state America. How about that? You getting what you voted for there? Trump's energy freedom bill is a Trojan horse for Agenda 2030. It's as they say, and the rhetoric is against man-made climate change and all of this, and against the UN. And meanwhile, they're just enabling the same infrastructure under different names. Should I play this clip of Levitt here?
Sure.
All right. Well, it's 30 minutes, so it's the whole press conference. There you go. You guys can check that out. All right, and then we get to the Abraham Accords, and instead of going into that, I want to invite you guys to check this out for yourselves, because I want to jump over to before we get to Massie, right here. This Religious Liberty Commission is the other big thing. It's not in the bill, but it's just they created it by executive order. It already exists, right? Along with the White House Faith Office. The Religious Liberty Commission, or is it a rise of a global religion, right? They had the first hearing of the Religious Liberty Commission last week, right?
It might have been more than that at this point.
It's been
so much has happened.
Couple weeks.
It's about
several days ago, anyway. Maybe a couple weeks. Someone writes here, heads up, saints, the Religious Liberty Commission is what happens when multicultural policy and the UN Sustainable Development Goals begin to redefine religious freedom. Okay, here's the big point that you need to take away from the Religious Liberty Commission. Now, what they will tell you that it's established for, and many of the people involved with it might truly believe that this is what it's for, is, for example, back in 2021 and 2022, when people were being forced to take the jab or lose their job, many businesses, and corporations, and government entities were denying religious exemptions. So that's one of the reasons that they say that they formed this Religious Liberty Commission, is to protect one's ability to claim a religious exemption on something like a medical treatment. And that would be great. The problem is we have the First Amendment. We already have the First Amendment. Anything that you try to add on to that is only going to cause problems. So here's basically what Summer and I came up with as a statement that sort of summarizes it all. Why the Religious Liberty Commission is no good. It's no bueno. That's because the First Amendment secures that one is at liberty to believe. Pay attention to that. The First Amendment secures right here that you're at liberty to believe. It secures your right to worship, okay, to believe, to be a Christian or to be a Jew or to be a Sikh in the United States. It secures that you're at liberty to believe. Trump's new Religious Liberty Commission seeks to standardize what one is at liberty to believe. So, is that clear? Do you understand the difference? The First Amendment is already there to secure your right, your religious liberty, the Establishment Clause, that the nation, the state, the government will not declare any religion to be the official religion of the nation or of the government. It won't recognize any one religion. But certainly, a person from any religion can be in the government. This whole idea of separation of church and state is a misnomer that doesn't really exist. The First Amendment is there to say that the government will not establish an official religion. But when you have this Religious Liberty Commission making its way into the executive branch now, ultimately this is what it's doing. Because it has to. It can do no other. Why? Let's just tell you why that is. On the surface, the Religious Liberty Commission appears to be a win for people of faith. However, beneath the conscientious-sounding platitudes, lies, and alarming dictate, what the Religious Liberty Commission creates is something that Summer and I have coined here, right? A term. Managed pluralism. We already live in a pluralist nation. The First Amendment secures that right. Okay? But this is a form of managed pluralism. It's doctrinal gatekeeping wrapped in patriotic language. The very meaning of religious freedom could be redefined as those beliefs that conform to state-approved standards of tolerance and inclusivity. Now that's what is possible whenever you put in an agency or a branch, or not a branch, but an agency or a department within the government that is there to manage the religions in the country, to manage what is valid to be believed. In a world hostile to the absolute truth claims of Christianity, the First Amendment has always been a bulwark for the church, and it has been a guardian for the Great Commission. And even though America's sins have been many, still, for over 200 years, God has produced a multitude of American missionaries who carried the light of the gospel to the farthest flung territories of the world, coming out of this nation. But when liberty is redefined as the equal validity of all beliefs, that's what the Religious Liberty Commission ultimately does, is it says that all religions are valid. And by saying that all religions are valid, they're saying that all of these beliefs are equal in truth. That's why the founders were very clear to not have anything in the government that could possibly be like this Religious Liberty Commission. That's what the First Amendment does. It prevents, I think that the Religious Liberty Commission is unconstitutional for that reason.
It is. We're not supposed to mix state and church.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you should not, what we're going toward, or what we're experiencing is the merging of corporations, government, and religion, as we've shown with the social emotional learning, that it's actually an offshoot of theosophical thinking. It's just been wrapped in more clinical therapeutic language.
It just means that theosophy, for example, theosophy would have to be considered equally as valid as Christianity.
Well, that too. But it's like with the way that the kids are being taught in school through the social emotional learning STEM stream programs, they're literally like priming them and conditioning them into the gospel of this oneness, ecumenical interfaith.
That's right. That's what I'm saying is now that
it's a religion.
Now there's a mechanism in place so that when they teach that in the schools, when a Christian comes up and says, hang on, you're teaching religion in the schools, now the Religious Liberty Commission will say, oh, but wait, all religions are equally valid and you can't complain about that.
Right.
So it sets up a situation, as Summer has pointed out here, that where the gospel must necessarily be recast as intolerance. How is that? Well, it undermines the First Amendment, which, as we said, is in itself sufficient to protect religious liberty. The First Amendment needs no enhancement. It needs no reinterpretation or institutional reinforcement through commissions, councils, or federal advisory boards. Its strength lies in its restraint. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That's the Establishment Clause. Or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. But, and in this case, Congress did not make any such establishment or prohibit anything. It was executive order again. Now, what the First Amendment does is it establishes these two profound principles. Government cannot create or endorse national religion. Secondly, individuals may worship or not worship as your conscience dictates. So the founders' wisdom was not in attempting to define what constitutes correct belief, but in restraining government from doing so. That's where their genius was to keep tyrants from getting power. So this principle, this First Amendment principle here, creates space for the gospel to be preached. It creates space for false religions to be tested and exposed, and it creates space for your conscience to be bound by truth rather than coercion or force. What this Religious Liberty Commission ultimately can lead to, when a government-affiliated body like the Commission convenes an inclusive panel, which they have done, of religious leaders from across the spectrum of faith traditions, which is called interfaith ecumenism. All these faiths are equal. For the stated purpose of protecting religious liberty, then we should expect, in fact, we should be on high alert for its inevitable drift from safeguarding liberty to managing doctrine. 3 things to watch out for with the Religious Liberty Commission and the White House Faith Office, for that matter. Watch out for the defining of that which represents legitimate religious expression. Watch out for them to be setting policy boundaries around what constitutes acceptable belief or practice. And watch for them to equate incompatible truth claims under the banner of shared values. And that's what Summer means here when she says that it's in line, in harmony with the Sustainable Development Goals. So the nature of this commission, which is created by executive fiat, without a debate, vote, or a clear public demand for it, requires that we vigilantly watch for these statements and policy proposals that represent a drift of the federal government from protector of religious freedom to the arbiter of conscience and valid religious content, which is exactly what the First Amendment exists to prohibit. I think maybe just this example right quick. If you think of it like this, the founders couldn't know exactly the players that would be involved 200 years, almost 250 years down the road. But they were impressively prescient in their anticipation of exactly the scenario we have before us right now, where either ignorant or insidious actors might, for example, assemble, this is just an example, Baptist pastors, Catholic bishops, Quaker elders, Muslim imams, all in a commission to protect religious liberty. Then, in the interest of unity, this body of Baptists, Catholics, Quakers, and Muslims might decide that the Baptist doctrine of sola fide, or salvation by faith alone in Christ alone, is offensive. You can't make that claim anymore because all our truth claims are valid, and these Muslims don't believe that. In fact, these Catholics don't believe that. And so it's offensive to other faith traditions. Familiar with this kind of malignant top-down doctrinal regulation, the founders' preventative prescription was the First Amendment. Once again, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That is the First Amendment. The civil magistrate has no rightful authority to impose religious doctrines or restrain the liberty of conscience in worship and belief. God is Lord of the conscience, not government. And James Madison affirms as much. Now, take this and fast forward to today. Consider the scenario that this Religious Liberty Commission makes possible. John 14:6, Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That is an exclusive truth claim. That single verse sets the gospel of Jesus Christ apart from all other faiths and religious systems. That Jesus Christ is the only way to be saved, the only way to God the Father, and not one way among many. That is a fundamental core doctrine of Christianity, and it's one of the clearest and most exclusive truth claims in all of Scripture. But under the watchful and ecumenical eye of managed pluralism, like the Religious Liberty Commission, this statement must necessarily be deemed intolerant. If a citizen or a member of the commission expresses that they're offended by Christ's claim to exclusivity, Christ's claim, not ours, but Christ's claim to exclusivity, then Christ himself becomes cited as hateful, and his words would be prohibited.
Right, and I would even argue that this committee that they've put together is sort of optics, because we know where all of this is going. It's going toward open and affirming, and
that's what it opens the door for.
Right. So that's already like set in stone. It's just like the fact that they've got this committee makes it look like these people are going to be involved in these very important decisions, and they all agree. And so this is what we're going to advise. It's like a front. All of this is already decided, but they're just sort of like telling you. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's true. It sets the stage for all of that. And here's the reason why we have to keep. We're the ones. We're the government. You're the government until you're not. And if you're not engaged and involved, then you're no longer the government. And you have something. You have a situation like we have now, where executive order after executive order is being imposed. Why should we hold our leaders accountable? Even the founders were flawed. Even Thomas Jefferson, who established, he's the one who brought forward the term nature's God. He's the one who brought forward the concept that in writing, in the Declaration of Independence, that our rights are given to us by the Creator, by God. He calls it nature's God. But the idea being that these rights are not given by government. They are to be secured by government. But even Jefferson was highly flawed. He believed that Jesus was a great moral teacher whose true message had been corrupted by priestcraft and superstition. That will inevitably be the conclusion of any ecumenical government body charged with protecting religious liberty. Now, think what Jefferson did in 1820. He literally took a razor and scissors to several copies of the New Testament in Greek, Latin, French, and English, and extracted what he considered to be the pure, ethical, acceptable teachings of Jesus. He removed all references to miracles, all the supernatural, the virgin birth, resurrection, and Jesus' own claims to deity. All right, that's an example of why even the greatest political philosophers and framers of government must never be allowed to arbitrate the truth claims of religion. All right, so let's get back to Massie, who is trying as hard as he can to protect the Constitution and protect the people from those who might even, in meaning well, I'll do it glass half full. Maybe they mean well, but what they're doing is not going to end well. What we see right now between Massie and Trump is a rift that could expose MAGA as a cult. Look at this ad that Trump's new political action committee called MAGA Kentucky made about Republican Thomas Massie.
Happened to Thomas Massie. President Trump is banning sex changes on minors. Massie voted against it. President Trump is cutting taxes and saving Kentucky families $10,000. Massie voted against it. President Trump is securing our border and deporting criminal aliens. Massie voted against Trump again.
The ad comes after President Trump promised to recruit a primary challenger to defeat Massie in his upcoming election.
All right, so look at what they did. Check this out. What they did in the ad, they go through here and they say, look, Massie voted against banning sex changes on minors. Massie voted against that. Can you believe that? And look what they did right here with the imagery. They showed, look how happy Massie is that this drag queen is there.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
the presentation of it.
Yeah, association. So Massie didn't vote against those things, wouldn't vote against those things if they were in a single bill, of course. But he voted against the whole big, beautiful omnibus bill because as a whole, it's a bad idea. Okay? So that's how you play politics. Of course, he wouldn't vote against those things. And they even tried to show him, giddy face here with the drag queen. So let's deal with this just a little bit here and explain a little bit more about who Massie is and what it is that what he believes, what he stands for. So is Massie a man out of time, or is he a man for this time? All right, Massie was born in 1971. He trained as an engineer at MIT. He is not the typical career politician. He returned home to Kentucky to live off the grid on his family's land, and he has done that, building his life around self-sufficiency and local stewardship. His first public role in office, in government, came in 2010 when he was elected as the Lewis County Judge Executive. Now that's one of those, you're like the police chief and the judge. You're everything. You're the mayor. It's a small town. And in this job, he made it clear that his belief, that government should be small, accountable, and close to the people. Close to the people. Government should be close to the people. That is what you call the principle of subsidiarity. That's a biblical principle, meaning that those who are making laws for you shouldn't be 1,000 miles away in Washington, D.C. They should be in your town. You should have leaders who are close to you. It was 2 years later, though, when Massie won a special election to Congress in Kentucky's 4th District, a seat he has held comfortably ever since, because he has fulfilled all of his campaign promises, which were clear. I'll defend the Constitution. I'll protect innocent people from bad government. Now he's under fire from within his own party for refusing to bend his convictions to this populist expediency. As a leading member of the House Liberty Caucus, Thomas Massie remains firmly rooted in the legacy of Ron Paul, championing limited government, sound money, and civil liberties, even when they collide with partisan strategy. Now, in this article that's up on Substack now, it hasn't been officially released yet, but it's up there. At the bottom of the article, you can look and see for yourself Thomas Massie's voting record on major bills. Down at the bottom of this article. And it's important to look at that. You want to know. Actually, you can even see, let's see, right here. Oh, that's not it. I've got his, here it is. Here's Massie's website. You can go to massey.house.gov. There he is. And you can go to About, and you can see his voting record right there. So you can go all the way back and see all the way back to his first vote. Let's see, what was the date of the Big Beautiful? He voted no against military construction, Veterans Affairs, and related agencies appropriation. This is, yeah, you can see at the bottom of our article where we've broken this down into the major bills, and you can check. But this is how you can check out anybody. They all have to keep a record of their voting. You can get it at congress.gov as well. All right. So what is Massie's opposition to the Big Beautiful Bill? This $2.6 trillion tax and spending package, formerly known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. All the House Republicans backed it, but Massie stood alone, saying that he was voting against it because the budget resolution and the measure under procedural rule, citing fiscal concerns, of course, saying that this was going to be $2.6 trillion, means that the people who are passing this bill are not going to be accountable for any or much of that at all, how it's going to be paid back, because they're still paying back 2020. We'll be paying it back for 15 years or more. So when Trump publicly denounced Massie, calling him a loser, you know, as you do when you're a mature guy, called him Rand Paul Jr., which would be a compliment probably for him. And Trump sent messages warning that anyone Trump endorses would beat Massie by 25 points. So Trump has vowed to fund or at least to campaign for anybody who runs against Massie. Massie was on June 21st, when Trump ordered the airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites, Massie responded by stating that he felt misled, claiming the White House let neocons determine Trump's foreign policy. Massie asserted that only Congress should authorize war. Now, the contradiction or the controversy there would be, was it a war? You can debate that. But Massie stood on his principle. Massie also co-sponsored a war powers resolution with Representative Ro Khanna to demand congressional approval before any further military action in Iran, for example. And Trump retaliated on Truth Social, calling Massie a pathetic loser this time and a bum. Said he's not MAGA at all. Right? Let's see, I've got that one here.
Both of you gentlemen, I'll start with you, Congressman Massie. you know, I know this is an unlikely pairing. You are on completely different ends of the political spectrum, but you both worked on this war powers resolution to prohibit U.S. forces from engaging in hostilities against Iran without authorization from Congress. The president just blew right past that.
Well, you know, I think I represent part of the coalition that elected President Trump. We were tired of endless wars in the Middle East and tired of wars in Eastern Europe. And we were promised that we would put our veterans, our immigration policies, and our infrastructure first. And so what Roe and I did, we did this last week when, you know, they were rattling the sabers because we saw this coming. We put forward this war powers resolution. I've teamed up with Ro Khanna before on this, to his credit. When Joe Biden was president, we tried to rein in the executive and reassert Congress's authority, sole authority, to declare war and to engage or authorize the engagement of acts of war.
Something we talked to other lawmakers about as well in the Senate. I know there's efforts to support you, but the Speaker of the House, who is from your own party, has really rejected this. He says the Article 1 power of Congress really allows for the president to do this. It was a limited, necessary, targeted strike, he says.
Well, he's probably referring to the War Powers Act of 1973, but that's been misinterpreted. There was no imminent threat to the United States, which was what would authorize that. And I think that's peculiar.
But they were an imminent threat to who, Summer? Who was Iran an imminent threat to?
Well, if they were getting out of control, then, you know, or if it's time for their crown prince to be installed.
Yeah. So what Massie and what Tucker Carlson was really going back and forth to Ted Cruz about was, why is it that Israel has so much influence?
Zionism, Christian Zionism.
And authority, you know, has so much
Political
influence.
Zionism and Christian Zionism.
Tucker Carlson was challenging, why is it that Israel, a foreign government, is allowed to lobby Americans and fund government officials inside the United States? Of course, meaning that those officials would do their bidding and to support their government. That's not allowed. You know, you have to. No other nation can do that. You have to register, and people have to know that that's what you're doing. But the AIPAC, which is Israel's Political Action Committee, is considered to be an American lobby. So they get around it on the technicality by that. And of course, now AIPAC is also attacking Thomas Massie as well. So what happens is when a man stands for the Constitution here and says, hang on a second, this is wrong, this foreign entity, this foreign government shouldn't be having this kind of influence over us. So what Massie was saying there about the War Powers Act is that you can't declare a war unless whoever you want to bomb is an imminent threat to your nation. But because they were an imminent threat to Israel, we get involved. So that would be a violation of the War Powers Act in that sense. And then you can come back and argue that, okay, it was a limited military action. Again, what was the threat to the United States? So that's a debate that can be had.
To hear that from the Speaker of the House, look, Congress was on vacation last week when all this was happening.
You haven't been briefed on any of
We
the details.
haven't been briefed. They should have called us all.
So it's also been said that Trump decided to bomb Iran when Congress was out of session, when they were
all back. And frankly, we should have debated this War Powers resolution that Ro Khanna and I offered instead of staying on vacation and doing fundraisers and saying, oh, well, the president's got this under control. We're going to cede our constitutional authority.
Congressman Khanna, and we didn't hear from the secretary the explanation as to why now. We haven't heard that from anyone, other than a reference to the president had a roughly 60-day timeline on diplomatic talks. But we also know we had more talks scheduled when Israel launched this attack. So
the timing of it is interesting now that if you know that it's when Congress was They weren't in session. They were out of session at that time. So funny that Israel would go to war at that time. So, all right. Of course, then Trump launched his super PAC, which we showed you the ad against Massie earlier, at least a little bit of it. Trump-aligned GOP groups, including Kentucky MAGA, are funding ads and backing challengers to Massie in the 2026 Republican primary. Kentucky MAGA is being run by Trump's senior political advisors, Tony Fabrizio and Chris LaCivita. LaCivita said the PAC would spend whatever it takes, however much money it requires, to defeat Massie. Whatever it takes to defeat our fellow Republican. Of course, the ads accuse Massie of siding with Democrats. They say that Massie sided with the Ayatollah. And that Trump has publicly predicted that Massie will be history after the primary. Now, what's interesting also is that, oh, by the way, check this out.
I was going to say that this whole thing is just so suspicious to me, because it's like, why would Trump do this? This is really going to bring a lot of division, and it's going to...
He doesn't care.
Well, but I'm just saying it because it's such a strange, the fact that he would put all this money towards this campaign, it's rather odd. I can't help but think that this is really more about data collection.
Okay. Right. Certainly they can, it creates the opportunity to watch what people are saying online and put them into buckets for sure.
Mm-hmm.
This is funny. Back from May in 2022, Biden was still president, and Trump was considering, or he was going to be running for president, and he was trying to make sure to establish that he had support, if he was to win the election in 2024. So he was endorsing Republicans all over the place, and Massie was one of them. So look at this. So you tell me who is being more consistent on their opinion. Congressman Thomas Massie is a conservative warrior for Kentucky's 4th Congressional District, an MIT graduate and a first-rate defender of the Constitution. Today he called him a loser and a bum.
Yeah, and look at what he did with Mark Robinson, too. He just ditched him, too. As soon as CNN had some salacious headlines that weren't even provable, they slandered him, and then Trump just distanced himself from Robinson, which I was like, okay.
So as long
duly noted.
As long as there is if we're under siege by the radical left, he will endorse Massie. But when Massie challenges his personal position, he's not going to accept it. Okay. So, and of course, Elon Musk, Rand Paul came out and said he would support Massie, and also here, Elon Musk. Also, there you go. Musk enters the Massie-Trump fray. All right, right there. Elon Musk says every member of Congress who campaigned on reducing government spending and then immediately voted for the biggest debt increase in history should hang their head in shame, and they will lose their primary next year if it's the last thing I do on this earth. So that means it looks like Elon Musk is considering backing Massie. Justin Amash here says, please support Thomas Massie. The establishment is working to primary him because he's a genuine fiscal conservative and opposes the big bloated scam. Elon Musk says, I will support Massie. Even Alex Jones is backing this little movement here. So that's pretty interesting. So what we want to finish this up, just so you can understand what's going on here. What's the difference? Who can you trust? Who would save America? So Massie has stood since he came into office on constitutional principles since his entry into politics in 2010. In fact, this Kentucky engineering and political prodigy has managed to uphold libertarian principles that harmonize with a constitutional conservative theology of governance. Right? He's been able to be a libertarian, and he's managed to vote and conduct himself in office consistent with the theology of let's just say, for example, the Puritan political theology, the constitutional conservative theology of governance. That is a nearly impossible feat to pull off in modern politics, in the paradigm, because it requires Massie to stand for the Constitution even when it costs him political alliances, access, status, friends, and power. That is truly unusual for our day and age. And Trump has viewed Massie with ping-ponging respect and contempt ever since Trump's first term as president. As you can see here, he was angry with Massie during his first term for not voting for some of his bills. And then again here in 2022, he just spoke glowingly about Massie. But then created that ad that makes him look, trying to make him look ridiculous. But Trump interprets any open pushback on his ideas and personal goals never as a constructive dialogue, but rather betrayal and a threat to MAGA base cohesion. So Trump has used massive influence and resources to fight his political enemies, and to the glee of much of a conservative American public, right? It was I think maybe you folks did. I know I enjoyed watching him go against the radical left when they were trying to put him in jail. But now, under pressure to get his big, beautiful behemoth across the finish line, Trump is willing to penalize nonconformity. So the Don is even willing to deploy these strong arm revenge tactics, a la Massie. And Trump has the power and patience to force an ideological discipline in the rogue GOP party. It's not really the Republican Party anymore. You could see that at the convention last year. But what's interesting is this will mark the first time Trump has aggressively targeted a sitting Republican in Congress. So you need to stay tuned to this topic, because this will either be a mild win for Trump or it will fracture his base. It won't be a nothing burger, because this move shapes up to be a valid test of whether Trump has true command over his party. For Massie, this defiance might cost him politically, but what it really does is it underscores that he is willing to stand firm, to take a bold stand for constitutional constraints and limited government. That is a brand of integrity all too rare in politics, or anywhere for that matter, these days. For the party, this rift, this clash, exposes possible deep fractures within the party between the immovable MAGA forces and the small handful of lawmakers rooted in libertarian constitutional principles. And what's really at stake here, what Massie is really fighting against, are what is known as the omnibus, or the bundling of many bills into one voting package. So an omnibus bill is a massive package bundling together dozens or even hundreds of unrelated measures into a single vote. That's why they can say that Massie voted against, or that he voted with the radicals because he voted against the big, beautiful bill the first time around. He's not really voting with those people. He's voting against this monstrosity, this $2.6 trillion monstrosity. Congress often passes these giant bills. They'll usually do it at the end of the year, or they'll do it during crises like in 2020. And they will pack in defense spending. They'll pack in all kinds of subsidies, tax breaks, foreign aid, countless regulatory tweaks, all into one document. And often it'll be thousands of pages long. The big, beautiful bill was over When we looked at it, it was over 1,200 pages long. It might even be longer than that now. And because who can really keep up with all that? These things get passed, they get rushed through and with very little scrutiny at all. Now, by contrast, the way it traditionally has been done until recent decades is a single subject bill. A bill that's about one thing, that does one thing at a time. Maybe it funds a bridge, or maybe it adjusts veterans' benefits, but it stays focused on one or a couple different things. That approach makes legislation clearer. It makes debate more honest and keeps accountability direct. And that way, citizens know exactly who voted for what. And you don't get these crazy, you don't get these kind of campaign ads that make it look like Massie wants drag queens to be hanging out all over the place. So the Constitution doesn't demand single subject bills, but the founders envisioned clear and limited laws. James Madison warned that laws should never be so complex that the people cannot know what they require, in Federalist Papers number 62. Omnibus bills do that. They blur this clarity. They shift power to the executive branch by burying vague mandates and discretionary spending in unreadable piles. You see, that's the goal. You want to create something so complex, so huge, so unreadable that you can stick whatever you want in there. Single subject bills protect the people. That's what Massie's doing. That's why he's not going to vote for this big, beautiful behemoth. Single subject bills are easier to understand, harder to corrupt, simpler to reject piece by piece, whereas these big behemoth bills make it very easy to make backroom deals, hidden favors. It is exactly these big bills, like the Big Beautiful Bill Act, that erode public trust and shield lawmakers from accountability. And that's all Massie is trying to protect. He's just trying to keep government accountable. Well, biblically, this principle is plain. God hates dishonest scales, dishonest measures, hates secret tricks, Leviticus 19 and Proverbs 11. Rulers must govern with integrity and truthfulness and visible stewardship, Romans 13, Matthew 5. So these single subject bills, the principle of single subject bills, best reflects the Republican heritage, constitutional republic, the heritage of the constitutional republic, and biblical justice, because it supports plain speech, honest dealings, and clear consent. So that's really what's at the heart of why Massie is not going to vote for Trump's bill. Not because he hates Trump. It's not because he wants drag queens to be running wild. It's because he doesn't want these huge bills existing any longer. He's not going to vote for something that will strap your grandchildren with debt. In the end, how we govern reveals whether we believe liberty is preserved by truth or traded away by deception. So this article goes on to talk a little bit more about who Massie is. He's kind of mirrors Thomas Jefferson's suspicion of centralized federal power. His insistence that states and local communities must guard their own liberty. He's traditional in the sense of Calvin Coolidge, the quiet wisdom that the government best serves the people when it is small, when it spends prudently, when it's transparent, when free enterprise is allowed to thrive. In our time, he's most like Ron Paul, a lone voice who opposes undeclared wars abroad, warrantless surveillance at home, and spending sprees that mortgage our future. Once again, Massie's record in Congress is attached at the bottom of this article if you want to see it. But what he does, if a bill bloats the deficit, if it hides unrelated favors inside one of these omnibus packages, or if it erodes civil liberties, he votes no. And he has done that every single time without waiver. And that's why they'll say, well, he voted with the Democrats. He's not trying to vote with Democrats. He doesn't have their political philosophy. He's voting against these things. Bloating the deficit. Hiding unrelated favors. Call it pork. Or something that erodes civil liberties, he will vote no. For example, he's making a stand against the government regulating milk. He thinks that you should be able to buy and drink raw milk. And the federal government wants to regulate it and keep you from being able to buy and drink raw milk. And he thinks that's a violation of your civil liberties. And he's right. All right. So basically it comes down to this. Who is right? Trump versus Massie. Whose vision is more aligned with the founders? And who should you support when it comes down to this? As an American, more importantly as a Christian, who should you be behind on this? The original intent of America's founders was to design a constitutional republic where liberty is secured by structural constraints on government power. Federalist Papers number 45. Madison insisted that powers delegated to the federal government should be few and defined. The Declaration of Independence declares that governments exist to secure rights, not to grant them by executive whim. On the other hand, Trump's brand of populism, he gets his political energy from popular sovereignty, and that's a good thing. You want the people to decide. But then he will take the will of the people and wield it like a centralized executive. Ironically, Trump uses the perceived will of the people as an instrument to expand federal power when it's convenient for his purpose. And Trump also uses spending and tariffs and unilateral action in ways the framers would have regarded with great suspicion. So, Massie, again, has been consistent. Fiscal responsibility, opposes concentration of power in the presidency and the executive branch. So what is the final score between Massie and Trump? Thomas Massie's constitutional conservatism is far closer to the intention of the American Republic and the founders than is Trump's populist nationalism. Trump's version of government plays very well to voters, all of us, and our democratic passions, because in the wake of a very scary Biden regime, that was a pretty testy 4 years. But Trump's methods often veer into a consolidation of federal power that is at odds with constitutional checks and balances, right? As long as, he's doing things that will help us, not many people will complain, will they? The left will. But it can't stay that way. We've seen this happen by executive order, creating the Religious Liberty Commission, which must necessarily eventually define what religions are valid, and then there you go. You have the government getting involved in defining belief. So the reason this rift matters is because for conservatives, this is the battle for whether the Republican Party is a personality cult or if it's a party of principle. For the nation, this will be a test of whether constitutional restraints will hold when they frustrate popular demands. For Christians, this illustrates the danger of investing messianic hope in any man, in any particular ruler or movement, rather than the enduring truth that the government shall be upon his, Christ's shoulder. Isaiah 9:6. Government gets their authority to govern from the people, but they are established there and allowed to be in their position by God. So it's not just a political rift. This is a moral and spiritual rift. It asks whether we as Christians and citizens believe freedom comes from the government's favor or from its restraint. The government exists to secure God-given rights, not to stand in place of God himself. And as Isaiah proclaims, the government shall be upon his shoulder, not the shoulders of presidents or populist strongmen. Galatians 5 says, "Stand fast, therefore, in liberty, wherewith Christ has made us free." So as we bring this broadcast, this pre-Independence Day broadcast to a close, let me leave you with a sober word of warning and a charge for the days ahead. We've walked through the record here, and you can see it if you'll go to our Substack at Armor of Truth, at armoroftruth.substack.com, or you can. The link is in the description below. You can see here too Thomas Massie's voting record, and you can see that he has a rare consistency of principle. All right. So let me invite you in here to, if you've got anything you want to add before I've got a little wrap up here, but if there's anything you want to add, I wanted to give you a chance to do it.
I did have a suggestion with the article with George Orwell. We've got it at the end talking about the Declaration of Independence, which is pretty cool.
Okay, yeah. What was that?
It's at the bottom of the article with Orwell.
Okay, what was the title? Sorry, I lost it there. There he is. Okay. Oh, it's at the
bottom.
The Zoran Mamdani article.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yes, that's right. The video. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
And if people go to armoroftruth.net, it'll take you
that's
directly
right.
to Substack.
I keep forgetting that. It's very easy to get to our Substack.
Yeah, just go to armoroftruth.net.
Armoroftruth.net will take you there. Sorry, Okay, yeah. Check this out. This will help you understand a little bit more about what we're talking about why. This is what you should be thinking about this year on July 4th.
What do you think of when you think of the 4th of July? One of the things that I like to do is reflect on what others have thought about with respect to the Declaration of Independence on the 4th of July. And John Quincy Adams has given at least 2 speeches that I think are extremely important for any American to consider and to reflect upon. What Adams wants every American to recognize and celebrate is there's a providential role that America plays in its founding. And one of the things that is incumbent of it to do is to educate people about its enlightened principles. It's not just merely a parade and a cookout, and although all those things are important, they don't really get to the enduring principles that are behind that great annual holiday. So in a speech on Independence Day, he really clarifies, I think, what the founders meant by independence. It's easy to think and just reduce it to just declaring a breakup with Great Britain or England. But he says the object of the Declaration was twofold. First, to proclaim the people of the 13 united colonies, one people, and in their name and by their authority to dissolve the political bands which had connected them with another people, that is, the people of Great Britain. Now, he's paraphrasing the Declaration of Independence, and he does that in at least one other speech. And the reason why he does this is he thinks that the annual celebration of 4th of July should remind the Americans of the principles, the enduring principles of the American founding. In fact, when the speech goes on, he talks about how important the grievances are against King George III. But he says those pale in significance compared to the enduring principles that the Declaration is really articulating. And so he calls us back repeatedly to go back to understanding the Declaration of Independence. What were those enduring principles that Adams wants us to be reminded of? So I have, of course, always at my disposal our U.S. Constitution reader that Hillsdale publishes, and I'm perfectly happy to teach it every semester. So when you go back to the Declaration of Independence, everybody knows that it's divided into 5 unequal parts. There's the introduction that introduces the political context in which it takes place. Then there's what's called the preamble, and that's where you get that very famous line, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." It's followed then by a list of grievances and then a conclusion. But throughout Adams's speeches, he spotlights something that's really crucial, and I think it's easy to overlook, and I overlooked it for many years, and I want to draw it to your attention. This is how it begins. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with one another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So there's at least three important points that we want to keep in mind when we look at this. First, the Declaration is not simply about the doctrine of individual rights. It is that. But in the first sentence, Jefferson notes the importance of the sovereignty of a nation. Let's hear that again.
All right, I want to jump in here to remind you to listen here, because when there is the debate about whether or not this is a Christian nation, no, it's not a Christian nation, but it cannot be denied that it is founded on Christian principles. And you'll see that here in just a minute when they bring up the concept of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In fact, I do want to jump forward just a little bit here in the interest of time. We'll go right here.
Equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That's the second reference to God, and God there again is playing the role of a lawgiver, and he has given the law that all human beings have unalienable rights. Those rights don't come from government, they don't come from kings, they come from God. But I want to draw your attention to the first line of that paragraph. Now, Jefferson could have written, "These truths are self-evident," but he doesn't say that. He says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." And I think he does that for two reasons. The difference between just simply stating truths are self-evident as opposed to saying that we hold these truths as self-evident is the emphasis is on hold shows that there was a general consensus among the American founders that natural rights was the fundamental principle upon which the country was founded. And to say that we hold these truths implies not just simply a consensus, but it reminds us that that kind of consensus can only be born out of some kind of civic education. So in a way, the Declaration is not only a piece of, say, American foreign policy, it's perhaps America's first great piece of civic education. You need
a catechism. It's a catechism in American government and American liberty. That's what he's saying here. It's a document that not only makes a declaration of who we are and what we believe, but it's also one that can be used to train up the citizens, young and old, about what it means to be an American. Now, here comes the part about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and pay particular attention to happiness and how it's defined.
An education to help support these principles. It's clear that you need a theological education. You need an education in John Locke and Aristotle and Montesquieu, among others. So this, we hold these truths, this consensus wasn't just merely taking people's opinions and then just simply agreeing on them. It's clearly the product of a civic education, an education steeped in Western civilization and its greatest texts. The second thing I want to talk about in that particular opening is that among the inalienable rights that we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, I want to pause here for a moment because we're so familiar with that phrase that I think it's easy, again, to take it for granted and also, I think, misunderstand it. There are those, and this is likely to offend some people, who are critics of the American founding, who believe that many of our problems that we have today are a product of principles baked into the American founding. And many of them will point out this phrase, the pursuit of happiness, as being one of the major culprits. Because in their mind, the pursuit of happiness gives this impression that pursuit of happiness is just subjective, that it actually is a quest without any real end. And it's not clear what they mean by happiness. Now, I would push back against that. And I think that when you look at Thomas Jefferson's letter to Henry Lee, and when he invokes Aristotle, whose great work, the Nicomachean Ethics, stresses that happiness essentially consists in the exercise of moral virtue, we can start to see that the founders had something far more political in mind and would hardly ground the country in something subjective. Here's what John Quincy Adams says in Thoughts on Government, which he published in 1776. We ought to consider what is the end of government before we determine which is the best form of government. Very Aristotelian. You can't think of what is the best form of government for human beings to flourish if you don't know what the end or the purpose of government ought to be. And so he continues, upon this point, all speculative politicians will agree that the happiness of society is the end of government. As all divines and moral philosophers will agree, meaning all theologians, whether you consult theology or whether you consult philosophy, all will agree that the happiness of the individual is the end of man. From this principle, it will follow that the form of government which communicates ease, comfort, security, or in one word, happiness to the greatest number of persons, and in the greatest degree is the best. But what does happiness mean? That still begs the question. Adams answers it in the following. All sober inquiries after truth, ancient and modern, pagan and Christian, have declared that the happiness of man, as well as his dignity, consists in virtue. So the right to pursue happiness is the right to pursue moral and religious virtue. And the purpose of government is to secure our means to doing so. And so when I think of the 4th of July, of course, I think of it as an annual celebration of America's independence. But when I look to greater thinkers than myself, like John Adams and others, it's really an invitation to go back to what that Declaration of Independence essentially was establishing. It is establishing principles of moral virtue. It's establishing principles of natural right. It's showing us distinctions between civilization and barbarism. And all of this is something that I think we should all, on an annual basis, if not on a regular basis, reflect on deeply.
That was excellent. I'm so glad you remembered that, Summer. That's so important, especially now with everything we've just talked about. So, is there anything you want to say because I've got a little
Well, I was just
close
saying,
out here.
because our educational system has been hijacked, and we're steeped in generations now of people that have been indoctrinated out of understanding that reality of how our country came to be, the foundations of our nation, and its legal system and the way that they have come against it. And it's very sad, because clearly these kids, when you listen to the interviews of them on the street when they get asked questions, they don't understand anything about this. And that's because our educational system has failed them, and because we have failed them as a nation. We weren't involved, and they came in and they swept us away, and now we're living with the consequences of that. We're sitting here like looking at what's going to happen to New York City in November. We are literally living this moment now because of the fact that our nation has been captured.
And the Republican Party with Trump, who really was elected by a popular mandate of people who saw a left wing that had just gotten completely out of control. Mm-hmm. You can call them socialists, you can call them communists. We believe they fit the mold. Of course, Mamdani is openly, unapologetically so. Yeah. But the Americans were shocked and scared after what had happened for 4 years. And now here we are. We cannot allow another administration to come in and get too bold and start going off and doing their own thing and leaving the people behind. It's a dangerous situation.
It is a dangerous situation, and with the way things have gone, and how much Trump has, promised us the world, the sun, moon, and stars, and then just completely gone the other direction, and it just feels like manufactured consent. Like they just basically told us whatever they wanted. Whatever they felt that we wanted to hear, they said those things. And, of course, the agenda is just to push the goalpost forward. So, yeah.
Well, so as we think about this, I am grateful that Trump was elected, because the alternative to that was
nails down a chalkboard.
No bueno. So But just because the guy you prefer gets elected, that doesn't mean you stop. That doesn't mean you sit back. That doesn't mean you get to quit. No, you have to be more vigilant than ever, because now it's on us. We're the ones who chose it. So we're the ones who must hold them accountable. So as we close tonight's broadcast, it'll be 4th of July on Friday. Let's remember why these questions matter. Why Thomas Massie's lonely stands, why reckless spending and blind populism, why open communism in America's cities, and why open Islamism in America's cities, and why our own hearts and loyalties must be tested. We began with a man out of time, or perhaps a man made for this time. A man who refuses to bend when the winds of power tell him to compromise. Massie is not perfect, neither is Trump. But Massie reminds us that the true American experiment was never built to be centered around a man. It certainly wasn't built to worship men. It was built to restrain them. The American system of government was built to restrain the hearts of men, to confine rulers to the limits of law so that people might be free to pursue something far greater than comfort or wealth. So when our founders, our forefathers, wrote of the pursuit of happiness, they did not mean the pursuit of cheap pleasure or shallow indulgence. They drew that phrase from older wisdom, from John Locke and the moral philosophers of Christendom, who taught that true happiness means a life of virtue, not a life where every appetite is satisfied, but where the soul is rightly ordered under the sovereign God who gives man freedom under law. They understood, as we must understand and remember right now, that liberty without virtue is ruin. Freedom without self-government under God is not freedom at all. It is license and leads to decay. So the prelude to tyranny is ultimately what self-government without God is. The American Republic, as John Adams said, was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly unfit for any other. Remember that this year. Democracy doesn't take all around the world. Democracy is not appropriate for every people group, but it was particularly appropriate here, where the foundations were Christian, utterly biblical, for the most part. So when we watch our house divide, when we see movements that claim to be for America betray the constitutional guardrails that protect the people, that's when we must see what is truly at stake. The danger is not just that we'll waste money or grow the debt or fight undeclared wars. All of that is true and should be guarded against. But the deeper danger is that we forget that our rights come from the Creator. And our happiness is found only in walking rightly before Him. So here's my charge to you tonight. Hold your leaders accountable. Hold them accountable to the standard of virtue. Celebrate men who say no to what's easy when it violates what is right. Refuse to worship a movement that demands loyalty to any man instead of loyalty to the truth. Pray for the courage to stand, even if you must stand alone, for the liberty that only the sovereign Lord can secure. Because as we've seen, as open communists now stand at the gates of America's largest city, promising envy and state control, let us remember this. Their promises are false because their view of mankind is false. Their first principles are flawed. They deny the Creator and therefore destroy true happiness at its root. They offer broad chains. Instead of virtue and freedom. This Independence Day, remember that your liberty is not a gift from Washington. It is the gift of God, guarded by righteous law and moral virtue. Freedom is never free. It's purchased again and again and again by men and women who say no to tyranny, even when that tyranny smiles and flatters them. So stand firm, stay vigilant, keep your eyes fixed on the only King who never fails, the Lord Jesus Christ, the one in whom true liberty and true virtue and true happiness are forever secure. So until next time, hold the line. Armor up. Stand firm. Stay vigilant. Stay faithful. And pray for wisdom. God bless you, my friends.
As early as 1928, the communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat. The average American, they say, soft and decadent. He'll become paralyzed with fear and panic. He'll run away and hide and do nothing to interfere as they strike at the community's power centers. Any all-out revolution must create a state of crisis wherein almost all of the male population would be forced to remain in their homes because of its affluence. It has waxed soft. The motive force behind its life drive is its endless pursuit of prestige, conspicuous consumption, and sensual pleasure. After the stage is properly set, America could be brought to her knees in 90 days. Ladies and gentlemen, the organization behind these preparations has almost unlimited financial resources. Our enemies are deadly serious about their task, and it's nothing short of national suicide for us to continue to ignore their plans and their progress. The strategy calls for the quiet conversion of our government. They have one and only one solution for all problems. More government, and then more and more until it's total government. In 1943, the following directive was issued from party headquarters. It read, "When certain obstructionists become too irritating, label them after suitable build-ups as fascist. Label them as fascist or Nazi or anti-Semitic, and use the prestige of anti-fascist and tolerance organizations to discredit them. In the public mind, constantly associate those who oppose us with those names which already have a bad smell. The association will, after enough repetition, become fact in the public mind."
I'm presenting a Christian perspective. You guys are Christians, and you're ignoring the Christian perspective. You want to refute me? Open your Bible.
Because I don't hate anybody. Now I want to see every single solitary person on this earth. I want to see their soul saved. Every single solitary person. And each and every one of us that calls ourselves a Christian should pray vehemently for their souls, that we would see them in heaven and forget about all this when we get up there.